Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can you please rise as the procession enters the room?
Good afternoon, everybody. You may be seated. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Bekker van Niekerk. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Engineering, and it's a real privilege for me to welcome everybody that's in the room and also everybody that is online. In particular, I want to welcome Professor Deresh Ramjuganath, our Rector and Vice Chancellor, and also a Professor in Chemical Engineering in this faculty. Deresh, thank you very much for being here in person. We really, really appreciate that. Then we also have Professor Celeste Viljoen, our Vice Dean Teaching and Learning, and Professor Jaapie Engelbrecht, the Chair of the Department of Electrical and Electronic Engineering. And then, of course, the people with the red suits here in the front. It's not Christmas yet, right? They are just here to be the honorary guest in a sense of entertaining us today with their professing. So thank you very much, both Professor Rix and Professor Bekker, to be here. And then I also have Professor Annie Bekker, who is also the wife of Professor Bekker, and Art, Berto en Lena. Baie dankie dat julle ook hier so is. En ons hoop julle geniet dit net so baie soos ons. We also welcome Dr. Martin Bekker, who is the father of Professor Bekker. And then also very, very good friends of the faculty, right? Wessie van der Westhuizen and Magdalene van der Westhuizen. But today you are here because you are the parents-in-law of Bernard Bekker. So thank you very much for being here in that capacity as well. And then on Professor Rick's side, we have to welcome his wife, Christa. Thank you very much for being here. His mother, Karen, and her husband, Ian. The rest of the Rix family, which I'm told is either online or on the sports field. So also welcome to them. And then all the other colleagues in the Department of Electrical and Electronic Engineering and the Faculty of Engineering who are here and online. And then also friends, collaborators, students, and all the other people attending online. So you are all very, very welcome, and thank you for being here. Then I'm always reminded that I have to ask you to please make sure your cell phones are either turned off or silent. And then if you need the restrooms, it's out that door, into the main hallway, down the left-hand side, and then the men's and the ladies are both on the left-hand side as you go down that hallway. So it's my honor to introduce Professor Bernard Bekker, who originally trained as an electronic engineer. And I also know that he's got a PhD from another university. It's on the side of the mountain, or that little hill there, right, called the University of Cape Town. No, we have a lot of respect for the University of Cape Town, because Professor Bekker also has her PhD from the University of Cape Town. He worked in the banking. He worked in banking as a systems and network analyst. He redirected his career towards his own passion, which is green building and renewable energy. And in 2017, after serving in various roles in the solar photovoltaic and power electronics industry, he joined Stellenbosch University. So actually, that's quite unique from both our candidates today. It's people, engineers who did real engineering out there in the real world, and then they came back and they joined us. And we're really privileged to have both of you in that capacity, because we are training engineers for the real world, and the knowledge that you bring back is very important to us. So, Bernard, thank you very much for giving up that big salary in the private industry to come and work with us. He focuses on electrical power system planning and operation under uncertainty, specifically as it relates to the increasing prevalence of grid-connected distributed storage and generation. And I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about that in his talk today. One of his primary activities at the university is capacity building through postgraduate supervision, the development and presentation of industry-focused short courses, and guidance to a contract research team. He holds the NRF Sarchi Chair in Power System Simulation, and he's a registered professional engineer with the Engineering Council of South Africa. So Bernard, the floor is yours. We're ready to listen.
Good afternoon. Thank you for attending. I'm very happy to see so many students, so many families, so many collaborators, and I'm hoping to entertain you with interesting stories about electricity, about modeling, modeling. What is modeling? It is simulation-based things. But I have a very special audience here tonight as well, my 3 children. And I would like to spend some of my talk just telling them where do their father or does their father disappear to when he opened that laptop of his. So for that reason, I'll try and keep the concept simple. I think in general it's probably better to not be too technical. So forgive me if I still just jump into what I do every day. But I think before I go to any of these interesting content that you'll see today, I want to share with you a quote from one of my favorite authors. Don't know if you've read any of his books, but Yuval Harari said, "Homo sapiens," that's us, "we rule the world because it is the only animal, we are the only animal that can cooperate flexibly in large numbers." And the reason I'm showing you this quote is there's a very important realization for, I think, all of us. We are group animals. So standing here as a professor today, it's made possible by all the students that has worked actually a lot harder than me often. Sure, I gave the direction and the ideas very often, but if it wasn't for the students and the collaborators, I would not have been able to do this. So I want to start the presentation by just sort of honoring them. So a lot of them, we've been to interesting places. I believe very much in postgraduate community of practice. It makes your own life easier as a supervisor, and it definitely helps the students a lot. And I think we are so blessed as academics because what we have are, and I know you'll like what I'm going to say now, but the best minds of each generation comes to the university, do postgraduate work, and it really is so. It's amazing to work with these people, and it's such a privilege for us as academics, and that's why I'm here today and not earning some salary somewhere in industry, although there's space for that as well, I'm sure. Anyway, so thank you guys. I'm not going to be able to talk about every one of your topics, because there's so many interesting things out there, and I have only 45 minutes or hopefully less. But know that you are valued, and if you are not, your topic is not seen, don't feel bad. There's going to be other times. Okay, let's move on then. So where do I go when I open my laptop, which as academics we do quite often? I think we train our PhD students by giving them laptops, and then they can work in the evenings and in the weekends. And once you're in that rhythm, then it's quite easy to keep, which is not a good thing, obviously. Anyway, I built models. What is a model? I'll make it easy. This is the first models that I built. As a 12-year-old, I started doing this up to about probably 17 or 18. I still love old cars and the whole design and shape of it. So the reality of having this amazing old Mercedes 1930s, you get that same feeling by building a plastic car which you paint and you put it all together. So that was my first venturing into the modeling space. Probably Lego also counts. But it's what I would define as useless models, which can still give you a lot of joy. Warning for us academics, we can often play with useless models still, which is not of much value to anyone, but it gives us great joy. Anyway, that's where I started. PhD, I skipped right past the banking stage because I promised myself never to wear one of these again, but it's a very special occasion. So yeah, I'm wearing it, but I'm hating it. Anyways, so skipped past banking, did my master's, and then for my PhD, I focused on why products or projects fail. As you can see here, this is a mini-grid system in the Eastern Cape that was vandalized by the community it was supposed to be providing electricity for. And that's the sort of question that then moves you towards thinking outside of the technical domain, which all of our electrical, or most of our engineers probably do, think technical. But a technical solution is typically not the only thing. You need to also think about decision aiding for your communities, for your decision makers, comes to policy, it comes to all sort of non-technical things. And that was quite a good lesson for me, to focus on models of reality, which is not technical. Anyways, then I moved on, green building. That was a very satisfying experience. But once again, there my model started becoming semi-useful. I mean semi-useful because green building at that stage, a lot of the simulations and thinking that we did could not be applied. We did a lot of concepts and very little of this was built. And I think that brings me to what is important about models is validating them in reality. And as a PV installer, I was thrown into the deep end. It was the beginning of the PV boom, so there were no regulations. How do you design a system in terms of safety, in terms of protection, etc.? And there were many interesting lessons learned. Don't buy these MC4 connectors from builders' warehouse, for example, if you run out of them and you have only 10 or 20 left. Anyway, they will fail. But there's a lot of reality lessons which you can't get from just doing models. This was probably my most interesting product or project, taking an old product from MLT inverters and leading a team of engineers to design a brand new product, which I think looks very much like Tesla, so they probably stole our idea for their inverters. So I'm very, very flattered. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. But anyways, there was also models in action. How do you design something that's reliable, etc.? Right. But that brings me to the thoughts I had probably around 2016, 2017. And that's the thoughts that started when you're in London and you're wearing a tie and you're working for some horrible sort of place that pays you a lot of money. And that's the question of what is worthwhile spending your time on? Because all of us are spending a lot of time in our working life. I mean, 8 hours a day at least. And probably I was thinking about this a lot because my father used to have a statement which I quite enjoyed, which said, find something that you love doing and then get someone to pay you for it. So that's the right way around of doing things, I think. And so I was looking for this, find something that you love doing. And I think it became clearer through this journey of mine, through photovoltaics, through inverters, etc., towards electricity. Electricity is actually an amazing topic. And I'm speaking to my students at the back there as well. But I think you already believe it if you're in postgraduate. If you think about electricity, it's the most likely way at the moment that we have of getting a lot of energy, because our civilization needs energy, right? To get it universal access, i.e. get everyone to have access to energy, for it to be clean. Sure, coal power stations are not very clean, but you have the option of decarbonizing and cleaning it, to get affordable electricity, to get reliable energy. Reliable, try and be dependent on gas and a candle every night. That's not reliable. So we don't know what we have, but it's actually an amazing underpinning concept for our whole society. Anyways, the other thing that is very interesting for me is it's an amazingly complex system. Some people say it's the most, or the largest and the most complex machine ever built. Because if you think about it, geospatially, it's over the whole world, it's all connected. So it's a very large machine. Trying to get all of this balanced, especially with renewables, etc., it's difficult. All the policy around it, the costings, amazing. I'm impressed with it. So I found that passion. And what is, especially in this time we're living in, very interesting is that it's also changing very quickly. The power system, electrical power system, has what we call the 4 Ds that are currently really changing the way in which we as electrical engineers deal with the power system. Decarbonization is the first one, where if you look at this graph, there's a plan in South Africa called the IRP, Integrated Resource Plan, which predicts a future or which guides a future for South Africa in terms of what we're going to build next. We need 2 nuclear power stations, we need 5 coal power stations, we need 100 renewables. It plans all these things into the future. The one that was released literally a month, I think it's October, was released in October, predicts that from 2026, this is the amount of purely renewable, i.e. wind, solar, i.e. photovoltaic, and batteries is probably also grouped according to that. This is how much we'll need into the future. This is how much was already installed up to 2025 every year. To give you a concept of scale, a nuclear power station like Kuber is a little bit less than 2 gigawatts in size. And it takes around 10 years to build, if you're very lucky, closer to 20 if you have a lot of regulation governing it. So given that this is 2 gigawatts, what we are trying to do here is in 2026 alone, add 2 to 3 nuclear power stations equivalent in renewables to our network. That's an amazing amount of renewables. And you want to do it within a year, not 10 years or 20 years. And you want to do it every year after that. And that is not a dream, that is not a wish list. Well, sure, it's a wish list, but it's official policy of the South African government, saying this is what we plan for and this is what we aim for. We're building the grid, etc. So this gives you some sort of idea of the importance of that first D, decarbonization. And obviously we're doing that to get rid of the temperature effects from CO2. The next thing, which is very interesting for us as engineers, is called decentralization. The old power system was you build a big coal power station, you run a line to your house or your factory, and the electrons flow from here to there, one directional. The new power system has photovoltaics, wind, batteries in your house, PV on your roof. It even has electric vehicles that can charge and can actually interact with the grid. All of these things are now happening all over the place. So the poor engineers that need to manage all of this is now dealing with decentralization. It's all over the place, and it's very interesting. As the Chinese said, may you live in interesting times, but it's not necessarily easy. Anyways, the other question that we are grappling with as engineers has more to do with not the technical aspects, but the policy and financial aspects, and that is deregulation. On this side, we have Medupi. For only 80 billion or 250 billion, depending on who you ask, you can get one of these beautiful power stations. Takes you roughly 10 to 15 years to build. And that was your option 10 years, no, let's say 1960s, 1970s, before gas plants arrived on the scene. That was the only thing you had. You could only build these massive projects. So there's no way that all of us in a room can just put all our capital together and go and build yourself a new plant and compete in some sort of market. So it was always a government-driven, centrally driven thing. So your electricity provision was regulated. It was very strongly centrally controlled. Versus what is now possible, this big shopping mall with all the photovoltaics on the roof will probably cost you, all that PV will cost you 30, 35 million rands. It would take you probably less than a year to build if you do it efficiently. And well, you can't compare apples to apples in this case, but I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying what we're moving towards is what South Africa is also reacting to. We're getting our wholesale electricity market launched in South Africa in April 2026, which means small people like these guys, well, not too small, will be able to compete and will be able to trade in this market. I can buy power, I can sell power, and that's going to have, I don't know, according to Monique, maybe it will just bring the prices up a lot. So there's a lot of complexity around that. But it's definitely a new and interesting D that's happening. The last one is datification. Datification, by that I mean this is the traditional power system. Mechanical engineers will understand it. There's a lot of wires, there's strength and tightness and what things that we know nothing about. But the point is there's a lot of mechanical infrastructure that is passive in nature. And then entered maybe about 10 years ago when data started, your communication started becoming much more fast, your data became cheaper, enters what we call the smart grid, or the vision at least of the smart grid, where you have the passive, the old grid, and it has a lot of communication and data on top of it, which allows you to now control this really complex thing that is happening here because of these other 3Ds. You have forecasting, you have monitoring automation, you have asset management, etc., etc. But these are the things we are adding to the electricity mix, which is making our life really interesting as academics. Okay. When I joined the university in 2017, it was really the perfect timing for interesting problems. That was just at the start of load shedding. So let me quickly take you through how load shedding, or what was the big correlation between load shedding and bad reliability of power stations. So I have two graphs here. On the left-hand side is the South African generation fleet reliability. It's called EAF, Energy Availability Factor, and all it really says is between 69% and let's say 80%, and this is the x-axis is time. So through the year, all the generation that we have, all the coal power stations, all the nuclear, all the solar, I don't think solar is part of this, is available for 70% of the time, because some are out for maintenance, some have just exploded and broken down. The point is, you might have 100% capacity, but you don't have 100% available. So this was in 2018. We had I think that's internationally not too bad, between 70 and 80% reliability. You can see it's seasonal, because if there's less load over Christmas, New Year, you would also then do planned maintenance on your plants. So that's why you have this curve. In 2018, we had 127 hours of load shedding. Load shedding is when you don't have enough generation to supply your load. Now, look at what happened in 2019, 2020. 2021, we started getting to 1,169 hours of load shedding because our energy availability factor was just plummeting. But it became more interesting. 2022, 2023, look where we are now. Our plant is basically available between 50 and 60% of the time. Most of the time, half of the time, something is not working, and it can be quite serious issues. You know all about it. But I think all I want to show you, there's hope. It's the first thing, look there, there's 2024, we're down to 1,600 hours. And in 2025, if I can get that, you can see this is a very good trajectory, very happy about that. But what this shows, and what I would just want to leave with you for the rest of my slides, because I'll ask a few questions and answer a few things, is the correlation between your plant being available, your EAF, energy availability factor, and your load shedding. Okay. So I joined the university. I was the ESCOM chair at that stage, so I started looking at my own research group, started understanding the sources of variability in the power system, which is in essence weather and climate. Obviously, if you have renewables, that can cause a lot of uncertainty. Customer behavior, if your customer does things that you can't predict, then that gives uncertainty. Technological factors like power plants breaking down. You understand the sources of variability, then you characterize and understand their impact, and then you apply it to the power system. And that's what I'll give you some examples of what the research group is doing. But in essence, everything I do, what I profess as a brand new professor at Stellenbosch, is modeling, is simulation. How do you take the real world, simulate it towards something useful? Let's have a look at some of these models in action. So probably a question that is still on everyone's mind is, will load shedding return? We have a lot of promises from politicians, but I think in South Africa we are not that impressed with politicians in general, so no one believes them. So let's see if the academics can give you a little bit more trust. I'm not sure. Anyways, what models can do is they can highlight the consequences of specific actions. We can't predict the future, but we can show you, if this type of scenario occurs, what the consequences will be. So, will load shedding return? It depends. And that's unfortunately what all of my models or our models says. It always depends. But let's see what it depends on. What we've done is, and this is maybe too complex, but let me quickly just show you the colors. So we've taken every month of the year, and we've allocated a color to the likelihood of load shedding occurring within a certain scenario. So it can be green. Green, load shedding is very unlikely. Orange, potentially some load shedding. There's some margin of error, but it can happen. Red, you have load shedding is very likely, maybe levels 1 to 4 of load shedding. If we go to brown, it's really severe load shedding. continuous load shedding for level 4 to 8. Okay, so that's where we do this. And what is interesting, some of the work that Christina did, Christina Red, thank you for this, is this curve, which shows things happen slowly and then it happens very fast. So this curve shows the relationship between load shedding on the y-axis, and on the x-axis is just your energy availability factor. And you can see as the power plants become less and less reliable, slowly load shedding goes up, and then at some state it just falls down the cliff. And this is what you're seeing here. So it's also quite difficult to model clearly because you need to do a lot of simulation runs. How long does one of these simulations take to run? 6 minutes. Okay, so that's not too bad. Anyway. Good. So we go on. So what Christina did, building on also a lot of other work she's done and what other people has done, she created quite a complex model. It's an hourly model and it takes a lot of factors into account. But in essence, it's running or it's simulating our whole power system. How does the coal power stations ramp up and down, etc. And then it spits out for every year. This is for 25. X-axis the months, y-axis the EAF. So any of these blocks, I can see if my power stations are in good health, I get a 66% availability factor. Then for the whole year, I'm fine. I won't get any load shedding. If my power stations are in really bad shape and I get a 55% energy availability factor for that specific month, I'm at big risk here in January to June, July, August. I'll be fine over December. Why? Because no one's using electricity in December. So there's no demand. And load shedding is when you don't have enough supply for your demand to be serviced. Anyway, let's move on to the answers. I want to quickly just show you, we validated our model, like good academics should, by taking the 2022 to 2025 actual data on the amount of load shedding that occurred. And we saw if we now rerun this model, if we get the same answers. And as you can see, the black line here is the energy availability factor over this period. You can see in 2024 it went up. During the times when there were really bad availability of power plants, we had a lot of load shedding. You can see we start coming out of load shedding here, and indeed, there's no load shedding that actually occurred. Here in 2025, there was a little bit of a glitch here in June, and sure enough, we had a little bit of load shedding. So we know our model works. All models are models, they're not perfect, but it gives us some sort of indication of what to expect for the future, because we now want to run this model into the future. We looked at many scenarios, but for the purposes of this afternoon, we looked at 2 scenarios. Optimistic. Optimistic is not optimistic for South Africa because we predict low demand growth. So our economy is not necessarily booming, but it's very good for load shedding because you have enough generation to supply your demand. And we also predict that the new generation, that the IRP, that these plans predicted, that it's actually coming online. So it's one thing to say, yes, we need to build 3 Kuba power station equivalents in 2026. To actually do it, there's a lot of work from technical to policy to politicians that need to be kept happy. So all of this need to be in place, but good, this is the optimistic scenario. Low demand growth and high or very much on-time generation. The pessimistic scenario is we are really booming. We have a lot of demand growth and we have new generation that is delayed. It takes maybe, what did we say, a year or 2 delayed. Instead of planned for 2026, it only happens in 2028. Right, let's see. So this is what we get for the optimistic scenario. This is what Eskom says their EAF will be into the future. I want to believe Eskom, but let's say they are wrong, and it looks something like 2024, then you can see that we'll have high risk of load shedding still here in February 2026. There might be some in June, July. It will decrease a lot, and by the time we get to 2030, it will start increasing again. So this will always be a challenge. It's not as if we're now out of the woods forever. The pessimistic scenario, I just want to show this. This is an uncertainty band. Just important to understand that, I mean, we can't predict the future. So a lot of what we're doing will be dealing with uncertainty in these models. This is the pessimistic scenario, which definitely won't happen, but I'm an optimist, but it's good to show it. And you can see there's every year quite a good likelihood of more load shedding, and that is becoming even worse, 2029, 2030. So caveat, this work is based on public information. We are running detailed models where we get ESCOM data and all the rest, and they might show something else. But I think the point is not here to show you detailed predictions. It is more just to show you how models work and how we can, as a research group, inform decisions into the future. Okay, let's see what the time is. Should be fine. Models can also help us to highlight imbalances. Because all our systems, democracy, any system is a human-made system and has, at all times, there's some sort of imbalance occurring. So, one question is, this is my beautiful PV system. I'm very aware that as academics we can't just take pictures from the internet because you have to reference them. So I climbed on a roof and took my own picture. But I'm very proud of this picture. It's a beautiful picture, thank you. But it's also, I'm very proud of my investment and that I'm self-generating, etc. The problem is there's some communists or lefty people that are saying that I'm actually being subsidized by the rest of you. And I don't believe a word of that. But that's what models will then actually tell us. So where this whole subsidy question comes from, if you think about a electricity industry, it needs to have people that fix things. It need to have buckies, it needs to have staff that they pay, it needs to have a lot of spare parts, etc. So there's a fixed cost. Whether I use electricity or not, there's still a fixed cost in the electricity system that need to be captured or need to be borne by someone. And this is the sort of thing that all of us contribute a little bit towards when we pay our electricity bill every month. A component of our electricity bill is this fixed cost. However, it's getting complicated when you go to residential, even commercial tariff systems, because your tariffs need to be simple. So you can't have all sort of difficult to understand things. So typically we just measure or we just pay according to the energy that we consume, the kilowatt hours. And if you then put on your own PV systems and in essence you consume no kilowatt hours, but you still use the grid, you should still be paying for it. Anyway, so long story, the question is, what does our model say in terms of who pays? Again, it depends. In this case, it depends on where you are. So one of my students, Josh Dippenaar, did a study where he looked at all the municipalities that he could get data from in South Africa. And he then built a small model that just saw how much of these municipalities, in terms of their tariffs, if you build a 200 kilowatt peak commercial solar power system, or if you build a 4 kilowatt residential system, how much of that energy that you now get for free, in essence, is it, what's the right word for it? It's not contributing to fixed cost anymore. So they call this the solar shift or the cost shift. It's becoming too complicated, so I'll simplify it. I'm basically just saying that typically for a commercial system, municipalities are under recovering an average of about, 140,000 rands. No, what, 14,000 rands? 140 a year, which means we're actually making a loss. The municipalities are making a loss, and we, as the average PV person that owns PV, is actually getting benefit. So that's quite an interesting result. And obviously, if you're in the city of Cape Town, you might have a very different experience. You might actually be paying more. You might be contributing more than the average. But on average, this is the case. And how much? If you look at the internal rate of return for a residential PV system. So when I calculated it, I got to a number. I'm thinking like, yes, this makes total sense. I take my 100,000 rands and I put it in my PV system because it will give me a return on investment of, let's say, 15%. Of that 15% return on investment, actually society is giving me 2 or 3%. because in essence they are subsidizing a little bit of my solar system. What is more interesting is on the commercial and industrial PV side, they have much higher rates of returns because they have much cheaper PV systems, obviously economy of scale. But they can have up to, what is this, 12 or 13% benefit that comes from subsidization from the rest of society. But it depends. If they are in the city of Cape Town or somewhere else, they might be subsidizing by about 2 or 3% to the other customers. So it's just interesting what models can show you on what's happening here. Which leads me to another, I think, fascinating aspect of models. It allows us to interrogate storylines. If I were to ask all of you in the room, municipalities, where do they get most of their money from to keep them financially viable? Any ideas? Take a guess. Is it from rates and taxes, or how do they stay viable? Is electricity quite a lucrative business to be in? Probably. I've read News 24, and so I agree. It's definitely a storyline that is quite often told. But if you look at the detailed modeling results, which we did for many municipalities, and we actually did it also grouped according to the number of clean audits that they've had over the past 5 years. So if you're an excellent municipality that gets clean audits every year, you probably have quite a well-designed tariff regime, and you'll probably make at least break even, or you'll make some sort of profit. Call it profit, but we call it a surplus in your electricity business, your supply business, which has the cost of you have to pay all the salaries, you have to buy the electricity from Eskom, you have to sell it to the customer. But what is really interesting, on average in South Africa, municipalities are losing 7% on every sale that they make. So they should actually stop selling electricity. It's actually a loss-making business. And that's totally against the story that I read in News 24. So it's actually quite useful to have models in that sense. And if you were to now fit a curve here, you'll see the worse the governance in a municipality, the more likely it is that you'll have a negative surplus in your financial sustainability as well. Okay, moving on. Models can do so many things. So I hope I'm not boring you yet, but let me give you 1 or 2 more examples. There's a fear from many people that as you add more renewables to a geospatial area, you can see all the wind is over here, right? All the red bits is where there's strong wind in South Africa, so that's where you'll put all your wind turbines, obviously, if you can connect to the grid, that is, but let's say you can. So later on, you have all your wind turbines sitting over here. And as we saw, wind is really booming in the future of South Africa. So at some stage, you're going to have a massive amount of wind, and we'll be depending on that wind more and more as our coal power stations get decommissioned, etc. So now what happens if large weather systems, let's say a big cold front, a massive cold front moves across South Africa, and there's very high wind speed, so all of those wind turbines cut out. They start protecting themselves. So what happens? Now all of a sudden you have the whole Cape region, all the wind farms are not generating. It can happen. Or maybe there's no sun for a few days, so that's a bit less likely. But the point is, models can answer this for us. So what one of my PhD students, Amaris Dalton, did, he used machine learning to cluster, for a typical year, all the weather patterns that move across South Africa, just to simplify things. But you don't have, each weather system is unique, but he simplified it into 2, 4, 6, whatever that matrix is, by 2, 4, 6, 6 by 7 matrix, 6 by 6 matrix. And what he then said, for each of these, let's analyze them. Let's say the specific node over here. This type of of weather system that happens here happens around 2.5% of the year. And if you look at the details of it, it creates a lot of variability over here. While this weather system over here might have a lot of variability over there, or it has some resource issues. The point is, by doing models of reality, you can start at seeing where risk areas are. Okay, there might be a specific weather system which only occurs 0.5% of the year, but when it occurs, your system is really at risk. So when you manage that system, you need to have more reserves. You need to make sure you have your pump storage is charged up. You can actually do something about the risk that's happening. Okay, a little bit more practical. We did quite an interesting study a project, where we asked ourselves during the depth of load shedding, can a shopping mall, big shopping mall, the one that you saw just now with all those PV on it, can that totally be off the grid? Can that be running totally off the grid 24/7? Especially very important if you have bad power quality as well. It's not just load shedding, it's not as if the power is just unreliable, but also every now and again someone steals a cable or some transformer explode or something and you get voltages that's totally out of range and all your equipment gets damaged. So for all of these questions, can you totally take this mall off the grid? We looked at different architectures and we happened upon quite an interesting architecture, which I won't go into the detail, but it's actually amazing in the sense that it totally isolates your shopping mall, which is on this side, from the grid by running a new AC. So you're creating a new AC system. The question is, could this be done? It has never been done before, not for this scale. It has been done on microgrids in Nigeria and wherever, but never at this sort of scale. So that's what models create. And in the end, this is the Heidelberg shopping mall. This was the project we did, and very much models translated into reality. This thing is running 24/7 off the grid. It has generators for when things go wrong, but mostly it is just sitting on battery and photovoltaic power. So models can definitely give you confidence to innovate. And this was 2021 to 22, so that's a long time ago. Okay, I'm very excited about models, but models alone do not improve planning outcomes. So I can give amazing models, but so what? It comes back to my Mercedes plastic models. Thing is also, as academia, as academics, we are actually quite powerless in decision making. We're not making the decisions on anything. We are training students and we are talking, doing a lot of talks. But so how do we make impactful models? Again, I'm going back to my favorite author, and he says this: an imagined reality is something that everyone believes in. For example, money. Money is an imagined reality. If I ask you to tell me how much this note is worth, you'll say, obviously, it's 100 rands. But it's just a piece of paper. It's worth nothing. But we all agree. And as long as this communal belief persists, the imagined reality exerts force on the world. So that's a very important concept, which I want to take back to modeling. The second one that I really like about Sapiens, he basically says, we as humans only came this far because we could tell stories. We could tell stories that we ourselves believed and that other people believed. So I'll now translate this into a mathematical equation, just so that I can say I had one in my presentation. So, stories shape reality. I think we agree with that. Look at Donald Trump. He's a good example of very, very strong storytelling. If you add to that modeling outcomes inform stories. If we run models and we get results, it has the option to inform stories, like that thing about the municipality making money from electricity. It's not true, but now our model shows it, and we can start informing that reality. If you add those two together, we get to the result that for impactful models, i.e. useful models, we need to learn how to tell better stories. I don't know if you get my mathematical equations there, but that's really the essence of what my next stage in terms of professing would be to figure out how to tell better stories with the models that we have under control. So, how do we make it impactful? First thing we can do is we can learn to tell less complex stories with a lot more pictures. As you can see clearly on slide 217, and then the slide looks like this. I think we've all sat in these presentations of what they call it death by PowerPoint. Basically, people reading every word. Anyways, so this is what we shouldn't do. More simplification and more pictures by exposing ourselves to the real world. And I think this is where the engineering faculty, I just had a look today at the amount of research chairs we have. And I think that's a really important thing to have, is a research chair, because that links academic research, which can be totally useless if it's badly directed, towards something that actually is a problem that is relevant for now. So there sits our SCATEC chair. I'm the Saatchi chair. We have a concentrating solar power chair, green hydrogen, you're also here. And biofuels and bioenergy. I don't know if there's any more energy work. And then another thing which I think is very valuable for our community in the university is the work at CRSES, where Monique's group, Next, is doing a lot of contract research for ESCOM, etc. And that brings in knowledge, which I think is valuable for us in terms of making our models impactful. Then, by telling the right stories to the right audiences, what I've seen as very important is regulatory bodies. That's a place where academics can very easily sit on. I'm sitting on this NRS 972-1, which is basically how do you connect inverters on the grid. And it's so valuable because there you have a platform. You can actually show your models and it can be impactful. Justice Shiota is busy with this NRS 972-3, which is all about hosting capacity. What happens if you have electric vehicles all over the place? Your regulations need to adapt. And that's where models can have a direct impact very easily. So I think that's a very important aspect for me of making models impactful. Multidisciplinary collaboration. We're in the process of, we're hopefully launching our website next month. The platform for, what's it called? South African Platform for Energy Modelers. At the moment, CRSES, Center for Sustainability Transitions, and UCT's Energy Systems Research Group are part of it. And basically the point is we want to create some sort of platform where open and free modeling advice and information is shared. It could also be a good fundraising platform, always important for academics. But the main thing, it's awareness building and it's training and it's collaboration. Because CST knows nothing about electrical power systems, but they know all about policy. UCT knows all about energy. We know all about electricity and grid. So it's already, we're all winning from this collaboration. And I think then, last but most important, we are a university. We can make our models impactful by inspiring our students. And that's something I've become more and more aware of, that the power you have as an academic is in the bright minds around you. You can leverage them. It's literally, you one person, you have only so much time, but you have these amazing people doing all sort of research for you and with you, and that can really impact everything. Good, so that's my story. I want to thank my father as a special thanks for this whole idea of storytelling. I think you told me about Campbell's book of there's standard stories flowing through our human psyche from long ago. It's really interesting, so thank you for exposing me to the interest in research and probably the less technical side as well. Then I want to thank my family. You are really an inspiration. It's very, very useful to be married to an academic. You tend to understand each other much better, I think. It must be very difficult to be in industry and then have academic by your side. So thank you for all the sympathy and all the support. Guys, thank you for sitting through this long, boring lecture. I hope you understood some of it, or they have backup. They bought some cards and all sort of playing things as well. Anyway, so that's my story. Thank you also for the faculty. Well, I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. While she is adjusting the computer here with the right next presentation, it is now my pleasure to introduce the next professor that will profess this afternoon, Professor Arnold Rix. He is the professor and is also the incumbent in the Skytech Chair in Renewable Energy Systems in the Department of Electrical and Electronic Engineering at Stellenbosch University, where he has been a faculty member since 2015. His career combines academic leadership with industry experience, having previously worked as a project development manager at Gestamp Solar and IWEC. And I hope you're going to tell us what the I stands for in IWEC, right? Where he helped develop over 250 megawatts of utility-scale solar and wind projects. At Stellenbosch, Professor Rix has established a self-sustaining research group advancing solar photovoltaic and renewable energy integration studies. His publication record includes more than 70 peer-reviewed papers, and numerous PhDs and masters have graduated, and they have all benefited from his postgraduate supervision with renewable energy modeling, battery storage, renewable grid interconnection, and electrical vehicle powering options as research focus areas, of which we will hear more soon. He helps advance technologies that support the transition to a cleaner and more efficient energy system. And through his work, which continues to straddle academia and practice, Professor Rix actively contributes to the search of solutions to South Africa's renewable energy challenge. Arnold, floor is yours.
Hello everybody. I'm going to take a slightly different approach and hopefully you enjoy it because I'm slightly different. So this professing is new to me. I'm used to lecturing. So here I'm standing in front of a group of postgraduate students telling them about solar PV. So what I'll talk to you today about is where it all started. Then we'll talk about how it developed, what did it become, and then the problems we faced that Professor Bekker already mentioned. Then we'll go on to the solutions we pursued and eventually end up to the future and where we are now. So taking you back, like renewable energy, solar has been used by the ancient civilizations, and then only in the 18th century scientists became curious and started working with solar, putting together lenses, focusing light. And then later, 1839, Edmund discovered the photovoltaic effect, right? And then in 1870, the first solar water heaters, so this is solar thermal, was developed, and in 1883, the first solar cells were developed. Now, you don't have to remember these numbers, but I'm trying to show you the storyline and where it's very interesting to me. I will interject and tell you a little bit a story about that. But in 1954, the solar cell breakthrough came at Bell Labs, and they produced a solar cell with an efficiency of 6%. And it was really expensive, and we'll look at that now. But for the first application, solar was used in space for satellites, right? Because it was really ridiculously expensive. And that we can see from this slide, where in the 1960s, we had space applications where we had a cost of about $300 per watt. Now, if you convert that, and we'll get to that, what it costs now, it's really, really expensive. That's why it was only used for space applications. 1970s, we had an energy crisis, but the price of PV kept dropping. In the 1980s, we started seeing commercial applications for PV, and the efficiency rose. Now there was more research being done into PV, into the chemistry and the materials, and it was developed, and that development now sits at about a commercially available PV module with an efficiency of around 20 to 24%. Right. In the 1990s, the cost kept plummeting. Today, we are sitting at a cost for PV of around, and I'm going to keep it dollar per watt, at about $25 per watt. Think how far we have come from $300 to 25 cents. Okay. But I don't only work in PV, I also do wind. And I'll tell you about this flexible human I am and how I work with other people. Early wind use, sailing ships, then we had windmills that was used to grind wheat to make flour, then it was used to pump water, and in 1880-70 the first electricity was generated. And I'll tell you in a moment why it was only then we had the first electricity generated. And then in 1941, we had the first turbine installed of more than a megawatt. Right. This has been evolving over the years. So here we see from 1919, and that is the power output of a turbine with the diameter of the rotor. So basically the wingspan of a turbine. Right, we came from about a 40-meter turbine, and we went up to, in 2020, a 200-meter rotor diameter. Now today they are busy building a turbine, and I couldn't fit it on the slide. That's how big it is. 26 megawatts and a rotor diameter of 310 meters. Think about that. There's a Boeing to scale, which doesn't do it justice. 310 meters. That's like 3 rugby fields next to each other, lengthwise. Right? So it's massive. Right. Now we've spoken about solar. I've gone through the wind, but we want to get to the electricity generation. So we go back again. Right. To the 1600s, where the term electricity was coined. Then in 1752, and this picture, which is not here, you might have seen Benjamin Franklin showing that lightning consists of electricity. With the kite, he flies with the string and the little key, typically on the end of the kite. Right. In the 1800s, Volta invents the first battery that produces direct current, continuous current. Then only in 1820 to 1831, Ørsted discovers magnetism. This was a major thing. And then Faraday invents or coins the term induction. And that is when the first electric motor was developed. So now you can see why the turbines generating electricity took some time. They were waiting for the electric motors. Right. In 1879, Edison invents a practical light bulb. Now this for me is like the most interesting part, which hopefully in 20 years when I retire, I look back at this video and I say, wow, that's still interesting. In 1879, the first practical light bulb was developed. In 1882, Kimberley had street lights. That's 3 years apart. Before the 1900s, they did not have email, they did not have internet, but that knowledge spread so fast. Remember, at this time, there was a lot of mines, diamond mines in Kimberley. Right? So they had money for this technology. only 10 years later, the first mine was powered by electricity. And then in 1909, we had our first utility companies, Victoria Falls and the Transvaal Power Company. A couple of years later, Eskom was founded. Right. So Eskom was part state-owned, still is part state-owned, and the reason for that, like Prof. Bekker said, is a single person or company was not big enough to get all the money, loans, to build the electrical grid and generation capacity that we have today. So from there, Eskom grew, and in the 1960s to the 1990s, we had a lot of coal power stations built. That doesn't include, but Kuiberg was also commissioned, or first sections of Kuiberg was commissioned in 1984. Now the baby in the middle, that's me, all right? That was when I was born, 1982. So as I go through this, I'm also going to work in my thankings. So to my mother and my father that passed away, my grandfather that's already passed away, that put me through school and university, thank you very much. And with all these thankings, I hope I don't exclude anybody. Right, so the mega stations were being built, and South Africa became one of the countries with the cheapest electricity in the world. But they built so many power stations that we had an oversupply. Right? That's what you get when you have an oversupply, electricity becomes cheap. So for the next 10 years, we didn't have any problems. But then Eskom said, okay, whoa, hold on. The climate is changing, we've got to stop for a moment. And all building plans were frozen. All right? In 1998, there was a white paper released that's warned, not said, warned, that there will be a power shortage in the early 2000s. And that was the time when I finished school, started studying electrical engineering at Stellenbosch, and I graduated in 2004. Back then, the buildings looked very, very different. You could walk down the hallway and there were still ashtrays on the wall. Nobody used them anymore, but now we've got a lovely, lovely building. My wife came with me and she said, now I know why you look forward to going to work. You have such a nice place to work in. Right, 2007, 2008, we get our first big load shedding. Right, we don't have enough generation, so the system, to protect the system, they shut off some of the load, you and me. Right, and then we see on the news stories about wet coal. And bolts being thrown in generators so that they don't work anymore. So the story about the wet coal, very interesting thing. People think it was because the coal was lying outside and it was rained on. But that's not the case. Every coal mine, that coal has a different moisture content. And the plants, the generation plants, are built to handle and process that coal with that moisture content. So one generation plant would get coal from a certain mine, and then somebody came and said, well, I can see the finances doesn't make sense. You are buying coal from a very expensive mine, why don't you buy coal from that less expensive mine? And they started doing that. But the generation stations weren't built and designed for the coal with the higher moisture content, and when it gets processed, it basically creates a sludge and blocks the machines. So that's the story about the wet coal. Right, in 2008 we had our first utility scale renewable energy project, and those of you that have been driving along the west coast, just across from the turn-off to Eysterfontein, there's 4 wind turbines. Those were the first utility scale turbines erected, and they supplied electricity to the city of Cape Town. In 2010, they decided, no, we need more of this. So when I say they, I'm referring to the government. And the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program was launched. The first contracts and financial close happened in 2011, and the first project that came onto line was Kalkbold, a 75 megawatt solar PV plant. That is a plant that was developed and designed and built by Scatec Solar back then, and I'll just stop there and thank them. They've been an awesome industry partner, allowing me to do the research that I do, and in close collaboration with them, I also try to steer the research in such a way that it makes an impact to industry. They are still continuing to support me, either by funding or engineering knowledge, or even providing data. So I'm very thankful to them. Right, Professor Bekker spoke about the IRP, the newest one released. There was one released in 2018 that said we must upscale renewables. And then in 2020 to 2024, prices of PV dropped so much, now it became really viable to put PV on your own roof. And what we're seeing now, as prices of that coming down and prices of batteries coming down, it really doesn't make sense not to have it, unless maybe you want to steal some money from the municipalities. But okay. So now it is really a worthwhile investment. I paid for batteries, I was thinking, a year and a half ago, 3 times more than it costs now. So if you are considering this, now when it's so sunny outside, I have to switch on my air cons at home, because I feel that it's a sin not to use the energy that's being generated. So my wife says, no, it's too cold, but they can run. Right. So I finished studying my BEng in 2004, 2005. I started with my master's at electrical engineering, looking at rotating machines and working under the supervision of Professor Martin Kamper, and I want to thank him because I think he laid the foundation for all of this. When I came back first and I reviewed some of my students' papers, I couldn't believe how much red ink I used. But that is because he taught me well. Okay. So in 2005, I started and I did this work with, at that stage, we were working with Optimal Energy. They were building an electric car. I was designing the hub motors that would fit inside the wheels. I was having a ball of a time, right? I started here in 2001. Now I'm becoming a professional student. And my wife told me, it's like, okay, but when are we getting married? Right? And I'm studying. I said, no, when we finish. And we had that conversation many times, and I said, okay, I think it will be okay. We can get married. And we got married in 2008. That's why the ring is on the slide, just to remind me of that. In 2008, we got married. Thank you very much for saying yes. By that time, we've been going out from high school, so we've known each other for about 8 years. My first son was born in the year after, and the year after that, I graduated my PhD. So the good man that Professor Kamper is, somebody from industry came and they were looking for an electrical engineer that could help them build wind turbines. So he said, no, I've got a guy. He just finished. And he brought him to my office. I was a teaching assistant or a junior lecturer. I'm not sure what it is because it wasn't called a teaching assistant or a junior lecturer back then. But this guy came to my office and he asked me, are you interested? And he told me what it's about. I said, yeah, that sounds good. He said, okay, I'll be in contact. And I heard, not from him again, but from the HR guy. We met in Mug and Bean here, and he said, we started talking, and I said, like, yeah, it sounds interesting. Are we going to have an interview process? He's like, no, you're hired. We're here to discuss your salary. So that was great. And that was when I started working for IWEC, which is Isivungu Vungu Wind Energy Converter. That's what the I stands for. A couple of years later, we built and commissioned the first 2.5 megawatt wind turbine in the Cape Town harbour. There were some words between the shareholders, and all the engineers were retrenched. So I was looking for a job. I didn't want to go to Joburg. I decided I'd rather be a waiter at Spur, nothing against waiters. But I want to stay in Cape Town. And at that time, my second son was also born. So now I'm a young dad, 2 children and a wife, without a job. Luckily, when I was at IWEC, I didn't say no. Everything was just a challenge. So when somebody needed to do something and nobody had the expertise, I put up my hand and learned the hard way. But there, with the project development background that I had, I walked into a job for a Spanish company, Gestamp Solar, as a project development manager, further developing solar projects there. But I didn't study to become a project manager, and I was looking for an opportunity to do more technical work. And that is when my old supervisor, Professor Kamper, contacted me again and said, no, there's an opening at Stellenbosch University. And then I met Professor van Niekerk, they had the interview, and fortunately, I was appointed in 2015 as the Scatec Solar Chair in Photovoltaic Systems. Now, I specifically pronounce that name because it has changed. Like Scatec has changed, our research has followed industry, and we also have changed. So now I'm only the Scatec Chair in the renewable systems, covering a lot more topics. So coming here and joining, I'm going to give a quick overview that Professor van Niekerk has already mentioned. I started here with one student, postgraduate student. That group has expanded, and while I'm on that topic, I want to say thank you for all the students that's listening in online or will watch the video later. All my past students, I see they've split themselves. All my past students are sitting on this side of the room, and current students on this side of the room. Thank you very much. You are probably the most important people that got me here. So thank you very much. So they wrote under my supervision lots of papers. They have graduated because of their hard work. And now our group stands at about 15 student members. at any given time. I don't always know from day to day who is part of that. So, I'll quickly tell you what I do, right? I've given you a history, where we came from. Now I look into research about solar PV, wind storage, grid integration, and I'll try not to go into too many details because it gets boring. And I don't want you to be bored. But we also do modeling. Right? Modeling is a key part of our work, but specifically for African conditions. PV originally comes from Europe. There they've got half the amount of sun that we have. The temperatures are different, the wind conditions are different, the content of our sunlight looks different. So we are putting together models to help the business side of renewable energy being more competitive. So with that, we use machine learning to help us forecast what the output will be of a plant. So we take a lot of historic data and we tell this computer, train on that. Like a small kid starting to walk, gets on the bicycle, and then you teach them the street signs, and then you let them run or ride, and then they must navigate their own way. And that is what the software does. In the future, it tells us what we can expect. Apart from that, we do utility scale PV grid integration. We've got so many plants coming online. We have a very constrained network, so there's challenges. I'll call it that, and I'll try to sound very positive. But we do have challenges with our network and the integration of renewables, because currently we have a very good solar and wind resource in the country, but where that resource is, there is no grid, or at least grid capacity left. So we need grid expansion. But I'm not going to talk about that. We do studies about storage, hybrid system optimization, so where you have PV or wind, but now we throw in batteries. First we had the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program, and a couple of years ago the government said, well, this is great, but the power you're producing is just that, it's power, and it's dependent on the environment. We want you to produce power when we need it. So they released a new program called the Risk Mitigation Independent Power Producer Program, and that allowed the companies to incorporate storage. So now they can charge during the day or during the night, use the turbines, charge the batteries, and when there's no environmentals to produce power, they take that from the batteries. With all of this, we had these big coal plants generating electricity, and those generators are really big with a lot of mass turning. That's called inertia. And as we put more of these PV and wind plants onto the grid, we are eventually going to replace by some time all the coal plants. So we're going to lose all that inertia, because now we're putting on inverters to connect to the grid. And there's going to be challenges. So we are already investigating that. How can we overcome that? Can we mimic a big generator with an inverter? Going back to Benjamin Franklin and the lightning, we study lightning, and I've got two, one ex-PhD student and one hopefully handing in by the end of the month, doing research on lightning specifically. Now we all assume that if lightning strikes directly, there's no hope, right? But what if lightning strikes close by? What it does is all the PV modules act as big loops or antennas and picks up that energy, and that energy is introduced into the system, and it can damage components. So we look at that and how we can mitigate that, because there's not a lot known for solar plants, although there's a lot known for buildings. Right. We look at floating solar. So if you have an opportunity where you don't have land space or roof space available, but you have a dam, or you want to control the amount of water evaporating, you could put solar on the water. Let it float. Now you would immediately think, because it's so close to water, it must be running cooler. And if PV runs cooler, it produces more energy. But our studies have shown that those floats actually isolates the PV from the water, and the PV runs hotter or warmer. Prof. Bekker said once, you never say something is hot. A girl is hot. The weather is warmer. I remember that. Right, so we do study on that. Back in the day, we had monofacial PV. It could only generate electricity if sunlight came in from the front. Now with developments, they can also generate electricity from sunlight coming in from the back. Now that you get if sunlight is reflected off the ground. Now how much sunlight will come back depends on the color of the ground. If it's nice white, a lot will be reflected. If it's a dark brown, not a lot will be reflected. But then the color of the ground also changes the spectrum of the light being reflected. And that also then changes the way that the PV generates electricity. Now in some way we want to measure and communicate what's going on in PV plants. So we're also looking at wireless communication protocols, and we've basically decided that the one that really works great at this stage is the low-powered radio networks called LoRa. So we're investigating that for communications on a plant. Just imagine a 75 megawatt PV plant is a sea of PV modules of about 3 by 3 kilometers. Now, if you need communication with cable or fiber, you need to dig trenches. So to get away from that, we're looking at wireless technologies. And then I'll just stop here and thank all my colleagues. They've really made it easy to come to work. Collaborating with them, the more senior people inviting me to collaborate with them, the younger people allowing me to try and act as a mentor, but I think sometimes I learn more from them than they from me. So with my background in electric vehicles, I also work on solar-powered mobility, and with Professor Boyson's Mobility Lab, looking at options of charging these vehicles. Specifically, projects that I was involved in looking at if we are going to change taxis from diesel to electricity, where does the charging points need to be and how much is required. I hope that I did not time myself. I hope I was not too long. But I just want to share this with you. Looking ahead, I'm really excited for what the future holds. So I want to say thank you to those who believed in me, or still believe in me, to those who support me, to those who challenge me, that's really important, to those who walk beside me, to those who celebrate with me, and to those who remind me why the journey matters. Your presence, your honesty, and your encouragement shape not only what I do, but what I continue to become. So I want to say I'm deeply, deeply grateful and looking forward to the years ahead.
Thank you very much, Professors Rix and Bekker, for those absolutely fantastic lectures. I have to say, they were really stories, right? Stories, both of you. So even though Professor Rix said that he doesn't doesn't do storytelling, you did an excellent job. It was really a story. So good evening to the Rix and Bekker families and friends, to the leadership of the Faculty of Engineering, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is a real pleasure to be here tonight, celebrating two of our outstanding colleagues, Professors Arnold Rix and Professor Bernard Bekker, as they mark one of the great milestones in an academic career, and that is the progression into the ranks of full professorship and in delivering your inaugural lectures. Now, these occasions are always special. They're not just about showcasing research or listing achievements. They're about celebrating a journey. And in both of your lectures this evening, you actually demonstrated that through the journeys that you took in your development, in your formation, and ultimately in terms of the work that you're doing in research. It's a celebration of the journey, how your scholarly curiosity, your perseverance, and your passion have come together to really make a difference and to make an academic impact. And in the case of Prof. Arnold and Prof. Bekker, that difference and that impact that you want to make is profoundly needed by our country. I think given, especially over the last 2 decades, the challenges that we've faced with energy security in the country, the work that you're doing is critical to ensure that security into the future. Arnold's lecture, Creating Stability Through Disruption with Renewable Energy, captures perfectly the paradox of our energy story as a country. South Africa's energy landscape has been shaped by disruption, from the old dominance of coal and the rise of industrialization to the more recent realities of load shedding. And he reminds us that disruption can also be a powerful source of renewal. His own journey reflects that truth, as he shared with us with life milestones that he's had in giving his lecture, from working on large projects where he's aided in building these kind of 250 megawatt solar and wind projects in industry, to leading cutting-edge research here at Stellenbosch University on renewable energy modeling, battery storage, and electric mobility. You have turned challenge into opportunity. I think in your story as well, that has been a constant theme in terms of what you've done. You've shown us how engineering can bring stability out of chaos, and how innovation can be a deeply hopeful act. And I think in South Africa at this point in time, we need all the hope in terms of addressing these challenges that we face, none the more so in terms of energy. And then we have Professor Bekker, whose lecture, It Depends. And it depends on a lot of things, as we can see in your lecture. It depends. Using models to support South Africa's future electricity system reminds us that energy isn't just about technology. It's also about choices, it's about planning, but importantly, it's about sound decision making. Prof. Bekker asks some tough questions. Will load shedding return? How do we keep the grid stable as more renewables come online? Who really pays for rooftop solar? His point is clear. These questions can't be answered on instinct alone. They need rigorous analysis, good data, and open communication between science, policy, and society. Through his leadership of the Saatchi Chair in Power System Simulation, he's helping us to make sure that our country's energy planning is informed, that it's transparent, but importantly, he's doing work that is in the public's interest. He's showing how universities, and in fact both of them do that, showing how universities can serve as trusted guides in navigating uncertainty. Together, Arnold and Bernard represent two complementary strengths of Stellenbosch University's Faculty of Engineering. Innovation that's rooted in real-world application, but importantly, research that directly serves the public good. And I think some people at Stellenbosch University are probably tired of me quoting Vision 2040 that we have for this institution, and about emphasizing that as a university, in us striving to be academically excellent, it's not just for the sake of being academically excellent, but it's about how do we translate that academic excellence into service to society. And the work that you are doing is exactly that. It is serving our society. Therefore, as Vice-Chancellor, I'm deeply proud to see this kind of work taking shape within our institution. Work that speaks not only to technical and academic excellence, but also to national responsibility. Because what these professors remind us tonight is that engineering at its core is about people. It's about serving people, keeping the lights on, keeping communities running, and building a more sustainable and equitable future for everyone. So on behalf of the university, I want to say a heartfelt congratulations to the both of you. Your achievements, your work inspires us. Your work matters deeply, not just to Stellenbosch University, but we're looking forward to how you translate this into the greater good for South Africa, but importantly for the world. So may you continue to teach, to lead, to profess, and to innovate with purpose. And may your example keep reminding us that even in disruption, there is always opportunity if we have the courage to see it through. Thank you very much once again for your lectures, and congratulations on your ascension to the ranks of full professor at this institution. Now we're going to symbolically hand over these scrolls to officially make you professors at the institution. So can I call Professor Rix first? And Professor Bekker. Congratulations.
Thank you, Professor Dresch. Okay, my name is Japie Engelbrecht, and I'm the HOD for Electrical and Electronic Engineering. And I just have to say a few final words before we conclude this occasion. So, if you'll allow me to give a few words of thanks. Thank you for the Corporate Communications and Marketing Division for their arrangements and the recording and live streaming of this lecture. They really do a lot of work to market this beforehand, and you can see the professional pictures and the pageantry, as Bernard said, that we experience here. Thank you very much for that. So specifically, we want to thank Amira Brown, Chuma Jakala, Krista Davids, Justin Alberts, and Jonathan Dale Blankenberg. And also thank you especially for Prof. Dresch for being here. We really appreciate it. Our Rector and Vice Chancellor, Also from the faculty, Prof. Celeste Viljoen and Prof. Wikus van Niekerk, our Dean and our Vice Dean, Learning and Teaching. And then thank you especially to the Dean's office staff, specifically Ulrich Smith, Clinton Botha and Jamie Sampson, for all the preparations to get the venues ready for tonight. And also a special thanks to Marlie Oberholzer, who I forgot to thank the last time we had an inaugural lecture. She really does a lot of work behind the scenes as well. And then finally, our honorary speakers, Prof. Bernard Bekker, Prof. Arnold Rix. Bernard, thank you for your contributions in the department, especially your research and your mentorship of your junior colleagues in their research journeys. I really appreciate that. For inspiring your postgraduate students and I think also inspiring your undergraduate students. Thank you very much for that. And Arnold, thank you for your contributions in the department as a teacher, as a supervisor, as a researcher. And as I heard you said, you put your hand up, you never say no. Thank you for putting your hand up to be the undergraduate program coordinator in our department. You're really helping me a lot in the management of the department. Really appreciate that. Thank you to both of you. I now also have a better glimpse into your what you do in your research and your journey so far. Thank you for sharing that with us. Okay, then I would just like to invite you all to join us for refreshments in the landing area after the academic procession has left. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Prof. Can you please rise as the procession leaves the room?